guys, thanks for joining me in today's focus stacking program. I wanted to go over this because I had a lot of different requests for learning how to do focus stacking, so I thought I would give you a little bit of a slideshow up front here with some information, and then I'll go in and show you some of the images that I have processed and some tips and tricks that I have to go along with that. So let's get started. So what is focus stacking, just in case you're not familiar with exactly what we're doing? And focus stacking is taking multiple images of the same composition layered together to create one image that is in focus throughout the entire image. So while one photo that you would take on your camera may get a portion of an image in focus, generally speaking, it is not sharp from front to back. So if we want to achieve focus from the front or the nearest part of the photo to the depth of the photo, we need to do photo stacking. So we need to take multiple images and change our focus point throughout those images. So when do we do it and why do we do it? Well, I kind of explained it just then, but what it does is when you need to have an expanded depth of field, we need to do focus stacking. So whatever the depth of field is that your camera can produce, if it's not enough to cover the entire scene, we need to expand that depth of field. And to do that, we're going to need multiple images. The way depth of field is produced is in the camera, it all has to do with how close your camera is to the nearest point of focus that you're going to take, the focal length of the lens that you're using, and the aperture size that you're using. Those all work together to create depth of field. And if we are focusing pretty close to the camera, then you don't have as much depth of field as you would if you would focus, say, a third of the way into the image. So what we need to do then is take those multiple pictures. And in order to take those multiple pictures, it's very helpful to have some equipment. And one of the pieces of equipment, and you don't need a whole lot, aside from your camera, memory cards, batteries, and so on, is to put your camera on a tripod. It's really important to get the best results when you go to post-process these images that you've taken. To be able to stack them together well, it needs to be very stable. So put your camera on a tripod. And then to have a remote trigger, while you don't have to have a remote trigger, it's kind of good photo technique is to use a trigger when you're on a tripod. Sorry, lost that for a second. So when you're on a tripod, it's always good practice to use a remote trigger of some sort, whether it's wired or wireless. It's helpful to have a remote trigger. Now, if you don't have one, you could use a self-timer. I find that that works fine. The only thing with a self-timer is for each shot you take, you're adding 2 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever your camera has as a minimum amount of time before your timer goes off. You have to deal with waiting for that each and every exposure you take. And if you have a lot of exposures, you're just adding a lot more time to the process, but it will work. There are some software possibilities that are helpful, particularly in macro stuff, but not necessary. If you don't have them, you can still produce very good stacked photos. But if you have this, especially like I said in macro, it can really come in handy. If you're out shooting landscapes, you can pretty much do that without the help of these remote triggers. But if you have them and you want to use them, they will certainly work. Now there's two that I can name right off the top. And one of them I've used and the other one I don't. I don't own a Cam Ranger, nor have I used one, but I understand they're great. So I'm going to skip past the Helicon for just a second since I'm on Cam Ranger, and I'm going to talk about that. But a Cam Ranger is a little piece of equipment that you attach to your camera and your computer, and there's a software involved, and it will help you capture the images. Now, I can't walk you through the whole process since I haven't used them, but if you're very serious about this and you think you want something even better than the software we're going to talk about here in a second, is look into a Cam Ranger and what it does and see if that's something of interest to you. I just wanted you to know that it was out there and available, and a lot of people that use them like them. The thing that I have and used is Helicon Remote, and it works quite well in capturing just exactly what we need. And so let me tell you a little bit about it. It is a software. Now I have give one caveat. If you're shooting mirrorless, this won't work for you because it doesn't currently work with mirrorless cameras. It only works with DSLRs, and you have to be using either the Nikon brand or the Canon brand. If you're using another DSLR, it won't work for you. So that's of April 2020. It may change, but right now that's what they have listed on their support page. So you can go to their support page and check to make sure your cameras are listed. But what a Helicon Remote does is you load software into your device. So whether it's your laptop or you've paid for the version that will go on a tablet or an iPhone, whatever it is, you have the software loaded in. You will connect your camera, either wired to your desktop or if you can do a wireless connection with your smart devices. And then it will pick up and perceive the camera that you have just initiated. And what it does is it will read the f-stops, the ISO, the lens length, the camera type, and it puts all that information into its memory bank. And then you will go in and you will find the point that's closest to the camera lens, and you will get it in focus. Then you will tell the software what the farthest point that you want to take and get it in focus. And then it will tell you how many images it needs to take to get you to that point. And it will, once you're ready and you have your exposure the way you want it and so on, you will hit take pictures and it will start taking the pictures until it gets through. And what it does is it starts taking, I believe, with the frontmost picture, and then it moves the focus point throughout the scene until it gets to that far point and it will stop. And so it has captured the images for you without you doing anything. So it moves that focus point for you, it controls your camera, it puts them in a folder, all's good. And so then at that point you're ready to take them into a post-processing software of some sort, because you do have to assemble them somehow. So whether you take and you use Helicon's software that puts things together, which is called Helicon Focus, or if you use Photoshop, which we'll talk about here in a second, you can put them together that way. So the next thing I want to touch on, and this isn't necessarily, well, it isn't going to automate anything in the process of capturing your pictures for a photo stack, but it's a tool that you can use. So if you have Lightroom, this is just another tool in your toolbox that could come in handy for taking them. You don't have to use it, but it helps me see when I take mine. So if I'm not using the Helicon Remote, which works on my desktop, so I have that big view, I will tether it to my Lightroom, and then I'll be able to see the photo that I've just taken to decide whether I've gotten everything in focus that I need. Was it a good capture? Where is my next point of focus that I need to make, and so on, so I can move through my scene taking all the photos that I see necessary. And I will get into showing you a little bit more about how that works in Lightroom when we get to the Lightroom portion of this presentation. But for now, I just wanted to mention to you, if you own Lightroom and you've never done a tethered capture, it's very easy to do. We'll show you how to do it shortly, and it can be a tool just to be able to see better than the LCD screen on the back of your camera. So when you're taking your images, I have a couple tips or tricks, whatever you want to call it. Tips for sure is we want to shoot loose. And what do I mean by that? If you compose your scene exactly the way you want in your camera, so your composition is exactly the way you want it, when you finish and your output will be, we'll just use an example of a flower. You have all the petals on your flower just inside the edges so that it lays out beautifully. It's not got too much area around the outside, it's just right. What you need to realize is as you move the focus point from point to point throughout your scene, you have what is called focus breathing. And what that is If you were to flip through the pictures after you took them very quickly, you would think there was some movement, almost like you were zooming in or zooming out, whichever direction you happen to be, and you haven't moved anything. You have not changed your focal length on your lens whatsoever, yet it still looks like it is moving. And it does that, and it's called focus breathing. So when you then go into post-processing and you put them together, what happens is you may lose those perfect edges that you just composed. So you're going to have to crop off the outside edges because they will be blurry while everything else is in sharp focus. And it will be noticeable. So you're going to need to trim those a bit. And to do that, you may have just lost that composition that you wanted. You may have lost something important in your image. So what I would suggest you do is figure out the composition you want in the end, and then just physically move your camera back ever so slightly so you just have a little bit more area on the outside that gives you room to cut off. So then when you cut off some of that area, you are back to the amount of composition that you really want to see. Now the other thing that's just a note, so to speak, is that you can do stacking selectively. If you have a scene laid out in front of you and you simply want that flower in sharp focus throughout, yet the background you want to be soft and buttery, then just focus stack the flower and let the background go soft. You can put those together without a problem. So know that that's an option. It's just a creative option for you. Now, when you're capturing images, it's going to take a different amount of images for different types of scenes. So for a landscape scene, it may require 3 to 7 images, somewhere in there. It won't take a ton of them, so bigger vistas take less pictures. These closer macro shots take many more images to create depth throughout, even just a small flower. So the closer you are to your camera, the more images it's going to take to capture to get what you need to stack them and get the entire thing in focus. So again, it all depends on the distance you are from your camera is to the closest point of focus, the length of lens you're using, and the f-stop you're using. It always depends on that. And on landscapes, you might be 3 feet from the closest point of focus. And on a macro image, you may be 3 inches from that. And so that's where this distance to the camera comes in. So keep that in mind. Macro images, I can't give you the magic number, how many it's going to take. It just depends on how three-dimensional your item is that you're photographing, how close you are to it, and so on. You could have 5, 10, 20, 300. I don't know. It just depends. And you will find these things out as you're shooting. And if you're getting like 300 and you think, wow, that's way more than I would have ever guessed, do check your f-stop. Make sure you're not shooting at an f2.8 or an f4 or an f5.6. You know, make sure that if you're shooting macro, that you're shooting up in the 22, 30, whatever, 40, whatever. Pick an f-stop that's up there so you can get a little bit greater depth of field. Another little tidbit to think about is when you get your composition set up, it's hard to figure out when you're looking face on what is actually the closest to your camera. You think you know, but are you always accurate? That's the question. So once you get it set up, then move to the side and look to see what part of your scene that you're going to focus on is really the closest to the camera, and then select that as your focus point. And then you can move back throughout. So when shooting, try to be as meticulous as you can and as methodical as you can about starting at the nearest point and working the farthest back. Now for me, this is a do what I say, not what I do, because sometimes I tend not to be as methodical as I should be, and I'm bouncing around, and then I will miss a shot that I need to have taken. So keep that in mind when you're doing your shooting. This is just a little bit of an image to an illustration to show you a little bit about depth of field. So our camera, our angle of view, these are not olives. These are supposed to be bushes with these red dots marking a point of focus. And these blue areas are showing depth of field. what I really wanted to show as you move from this closest point of focus to the next area that needs to be in focus to keep everything in focus all the way through is that our depth of field gets wider with each movement into the scene, and our points of focus then are farther between each as they move in through the scene. So we're in the foreground here. We may have 2 or 3 within 3 to 5, 6 feet, depending, of course, on your entire scene and the way it's set up and how close the nearest item is. But you may have several right up front for your foreground image, for your foreground object. But as you move through, they get to be spaced so much further apart that it may not take a whole lot more after you get past that foreground image or that foreground section of your image. So let's talk about post-processing real quickly. There's some softwares that I can tell you about. There's probably more out there that I don't have any information on. One of them is called Xarene Stacker, so you can check out that one. The one that I have used is called Helicon Focus. As of today, it runs $55 a year, or you can buy it for a lifetime use, so $200 for a lifetime. Now, if you're going to use it for 4 years, off and on for 4 years, then the $200 is worth it. If you're only going to use it for a couple projects and you probably will never use it again, then you might not want to. By the way, that price includes both softwares. So if you just want the stacking portion, which is focus, then you will be able to get it cheaper. And if you are someone that's using something besides a Nikon or Canon, or if you're shooting mirrorless, then you don't want the remote portion of it. So you will be able to get a cheaper price for just the Helicon Focus, which is putting the images together into one. So if you're looking for that, be aware. Photoshop, if you already have Photoshop, it is good and it does a good job most of the time. Now, once in a while, you'll stumble on one that it has a struggle with. And then that's when I would tend to go to Helicon Focus or vice versa. You know, sometimes it'll work in one or it'll work in the other, and so I'll move back and forth between the two. But I would definitely, if you already have Photoshop, recommend that you go ahead and give that a test and see if it works for you. And if it does, you're good to go and you don't have to purchase anything else. So this is what I have for you in this portion, and we are now going to move over into Lightroom.
Okay, now we're in Lightroom,
and I'll show you some
and
pictures.
I
want to go over some pictures that I have put together already, and then some that I'm going to show you how to put together right here on the spot. So the first thing I wanted to show you, though, was I had mentioned earlier about how you can tether to Lightroom, and so I'm going to go over that real quickly with you. Now, I know you can't see my camera, but what I have is my camera sitting on a tripod, and I have attached to the camera the cable that came with the camera. So I believe most cameras, if not all, come with a cable that hooks them through a USB that you can hook to your computer. So what I'm doing right now is plugging my camera into the computer. You saw nothing happen on your screen because my camera's off. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be in Lightroom. I'm going to go up to my main menu bar at the top. I'm going to go to File. About a third of the way down, you'll see Tethered Capture and Start Tethered Capture. So I'll click on that very quickly. It will open up a screen, and in that screen, I can go ahead and title what I want this session to be. I can fix the layout of the way I want my titling to go above the frames while it's in Lightroom. I can put, actually this is the naming for the file, so it'll follow it into your file system whether it's in Lightroom or not. Then I can put it in the folder, and so this is going to go at the end of this folder, which already has some of these test shots in, so you'll see more there. And then you can add presets to it, so as you take it, it will automatically do whatever you want it to do. Maybe you want to have it correct for chromatic aberration every time, or you wanted to turn it black and white for every picture, whatever it is that you want. You can set up a preset if you want. You can also do keywording right here so that you know what it is. You can go ahead and keyword it. And once you're happy with it, you say OK. It tells it where it's going to be putting those, and right now my screen is saying detecting camera because it's looking for my camera. So I'm going to turn on the power on my camera, and as soon as it finds the camera, it will put a bar right across the top. There it is, and it tells how I'm shooting this, and I can take and move this around to anywhere I want. So I'll go ahead and leave it here at the top. It recognizes the camera I have hooked to it and some shutter speeds and so on. It says it's incandescent lighting. Right now I'm working in natural light, so I'll go ahead and just move either to auto or I'll go to natural, and we'll leave it at that. And then this is the preset I happen to have loaded in, and here is a shutter release button. So this acts as your shutter release if you're using this. So you don't have to touch your camera once you have it hooked up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to step away for just a second. I'm going to focus my camera, and then I'm going to come back and take the shot. So I'm zooming in right now. I know you can't see it, but trust me, that's what I'm doing. And I am focusing. And now I'm going to come back, and I'm going to just click on that button, and you could probably hear the photo being taken, and it will pop in here. So this is the one I just took. I can zoom in on it. I can collapse this so I have a bigger view, and I focused on the S. I can zoom in to see if I got it in nice sharp focus. It's still loading at this point, and just there you can see I got my focus is spot on. I can back out and see how much of the image is in focus. Do I need to take another shot to get something in focus here? Maybe I want to get the depth of inside that lens, see if I can get any information in there. So I may want to refocus there. Let's see if I can try that. I know that it's overexposed, and so I'll just retake it. And so you can make quick assessments on how you did with the picture, and this is probably a little underexposed. Try that one more time, and we'll click it one more time. So you can see exactly what you can achieve. It's just a bigger screen. You're able to see better. Now I can zoom in and see if I really got that in sharp focus. Maybe I need to retake it. Maybe I want to make sure this is in sharp focus and yet this is still looking soft, so I may have to take 2 or 3 in here. So you can assess and retake pretty easily. Easier than trying to, for these eyes to look on that little LCD, zoom in, move it around, and so on. So just a little tip, and then to disconnect, all you have to do is go back to File, back down to Tethered Capture, Stop Capture, turn off your camera, and you're done. So I just wanted to show that to you. That really isn't an absolute necessity. If you have it and you've never used Tethered Capture, it's a little added bonus on how to do that. So let's now move on with our focus stacking information. So I'm going to go back down to my collection of images that I wanted to show you. Close this panel up. Maybe. There we go. All right, so I have a few pictures here that I just want to quickly go through and zoom out here. This is an image that I took that is kind of an example of, do I want to focus stack this? Could I? Would it have been better? And that's the big question. Would it have been a better image if I would have photo stacked it? Could I have? Yes, because right now that newel post was pretty close to the camera when I took it. So it's in nice sharp focus. As I move throughout the scene, it's in pretty good focus to here. It starts getting a bit soft through here. This part of the image is soft. And then of course outside the window is soft. The question is, do I want to get this in focus? Well, I really don't want any more of that view out the window in focus. It would be nice if it was even softer than what it is. Could this be sharp focus? Yeah, they could be. The question then becomes, will it be a better picture if it's all in focus? Or do we just stop with the one exposure? If it will be a better picture, everything's in focus, and so everything has a little bit more of a level playing field as far as getting your attention as the viewer. The way it is now, the newel post gets your attention. It's lit a little bit lighter, plus it's in sharper focus than the background. So not a lot, but a little, so it does demand a bit more attention. If this were in sharp focus back here, then I think it would get a little less attention. So in my situation for this particular image, I feel that this image is fine just using one point of focus and be done with it. However, some images really work better to have a greater range of focus in them. So let's look at this next image that I have. And you can see this was done selectively. So I didn't want everything in focus again. I didn't want that background in focus. It's nice and soft back there. You probably can't even tell what it is where it's sharp, but the bubble edge or the drop edge of these water droplets is perfectly sharp from the top of the bubble to where it touches the glass. And then everything behind that is very soft. Even some of these bubbles inside there is soft. It's as sharp as the refraction is going to allow it to get maybe, but it is kind of a little bit soft, but yet it is in focus. That is what it was seeing. So, and this, you probably can't even tell what it is. It's kale. So that's what it was. Anyway, this was just a fun shoot, and I have another one off the same day I was playing around with this, and so I have another one that's similar. And this is M&Ms. And again, all these little water droplets are, the water droplet itself is in sharp focus. Most of the M&Ms inside the water droplet are pretty close to being in focus, and then it's very soft in the back, so that's that selective focus going on. So let's talk about whether you can do some images manually. And I feel that you can, not all of them. Some of them you can't. This one sets itself up very nicely to be done manually. First of all, I wasn't on a tripod. It's mistake number one. And so therefore you can see it in the image. There's way more space above this than there is on this left one. It's actually zoomed out quite a little bit, so it's almost like instead of just a focus stacking, it's almost like a focal length stacking, an angle of view stacking, whatever we want to say. So I'm going to zoom in here on this so you can see these two up close, and you can see the left one has the memorial part. The names are in sharp focus, and one on the right is softer. And as I cruise up through this, you'll see the fountain is much softer on the left one, which is where the foreground was sharp, and then it becomes in focus here, and the one on the right then is in focus the rest of the way back through. So if I did take these, and if I were wanting to put them together, which I was, I simply took them into Photoshop, tried to get them aligned the best possible way, particularly with this edge of this memorial, and I then masked out the blurry part of this one. So essentially I took it into Photoshop, one document, two layers within one document. I have this one with the front in focus on the top. This was my second layer underneath of it. So my foreground, I put a mask on it, and I got rid of all the softs. So I painted out with black the top area of this image and let it show through this under the second layer. This is my final image. So if again I zoom in, you'll see that it's nice and sharp up front. And then as I walk through the image, you can see that it's sharp here, and it's sharp in the trees and the buildings and so on. So this one worked out easy for doing a manual composition on them, a manual blend, because of that nice straight line. So let's go back and look at this one. And this is kind of showing you what to be aware of when you are doing yours. So I took these two. The grass is in focus on the left, and you can see how soft it is on the right. And then in the right one, the distance is, the background area is in focus on the right side. So I wanted to put these two together. So when I did that, here is the resulting image. Okay, so you can see now that the foreground is nice and sharp, the grass, and the background is sharp. So the rocks and the lighthouse look great. A couple things do want to point out in here. One here before I skip on and miss it. I told you about focus breathing and where it will give you an edge that you have to trim away so that your picture looks good. Here is exactly what happens. So the one picture that has the nice sharp background doesn't go as far as the one with the sharp foreground. So it has to be trimmed away. It's usually all the way around. This one is still, I've left it on here so I can show you, but it needs to be trimmed up. Now, when you're doing these focus stacking pieces, be aware that if it's a breezy day and you've got grasses or leaves or flowers or whatever in there, and there's any movement from from exposure to exposure, it's going to show up a little bit. And you can see it showing up right here. So there was just a little bit of movement on that one between the two images that I took. The other thing that I want you to notice is I only took 2 images. Maybe I should have taken 3, but I think mostly it's the camera and the software that puts them together just has a really hard time with these grassy edges like this. And I ran it through 2 different softwares, both Photoshop and Helicon Focus, and they both turned out the same. It just struggles to find the sharper image in these little gaps between the grasses. It should have been in focus in one of them, and it was. If we went back and looked at one of the other images, these rocks were certainly sharper than they come out looking here. So it doesn't do well, or it didn't do well in this particular instance at putting this together. Maybe I needed 2 or 3 more images and it would have helped, but I didn't have it. So I would say err on the part of getting too many exposures as opposed to not enough, because this one is not good enough for much of anything else but maybe a small print in a scrapbook or something, because that area is out of focus and I don't like the way it looks. So let's go back here. And this is one more, kind of showing you what to be aware of and how not to make the same mistake I did. So I'm going to show you these images. And I will zoom in a little bit closer. And we will just file through each image now, and then we'll go back through them again. You can see a little movement between 1 and 2. I'm not sure why. And then this one's 2. I think it was the way this is the focus breathing, and it just happened to be the way I was jumping around the picture. So it wasn't a real smooth zoom in, zoom out. It was a zoom in, zoom out, way far and little. So that was me manually taking those exposures, jumping from this point to that point to that point, instead of smoothly going from the front to the back. And that's why we're getting that kind of jumpy look. Even though it was on a tripod, I did not move it. Okay, so let's look at this again. I'm going to start at the first one. I'm going to zoom a little closer so you can actually see. So this is very sharp, right on the center part of that stamen, I think it is. And as we move through the pictures, you can see the focusing points are changing. I hit over here, these water drops. Some of this is in focus, and coming down the stamen was in focus. These water drops back here are in focus. And you can see throughout, the focus is just shifting ever so slightly on some of them and major on some of them. Here I'm looking at the petal and getting some of that. Now, I didn't care about the back edge of this particular petal, and I didn't care about this petal, and there's another one up above. I didn't care about that either being in focus. For me, those were fine. I just wanted the front part of it to be in focus. So then I moved to the front edge of the cup, and I took 3 images of the front edge of that cup. I should have taken 5. And you'll see here in a minute. Now we're back to the first one, but let's go, and I put this together, and this is the resulting image. And let me back out all the way. So that's the resulting image, and I was pretty happy with it. I think it's a pretty image. When you get down and you scrutinize the focus stacking, how perfect it is or is not, you will notice that this front edge is soft on this one. And then I have some focus, and then it's soft again. So I think I missed 2 different layers right there. There's a few spots up on this cup that I mentioned I should have taken a better exposure of. And then there's another one down here. And this one I've got a feeling I have, and it just didn't pick up on it. But that's the other one. So anyway, you can miss a few and still get a reasonably acceptable picture. It may not be one that you would be saying, oh yeah, I'm going to sell that as a perfect stack. But it's a pretty picture. So that is some pictures that I wanted to show you that have already been processed and so on. So now we're going to get into showing you some of the images and how we put them together. So I'm going to walk you through the process in Photoshop and in Helicon Focus. All right, so back in Lightroom, you can see I have 3 images here. This is the final project, or final image, but I want to take you through the 2 that I have taken to stack. So this will be a small stack. I'm going to show them to you side by side. I'm going to come in close so you can see a close-up view. So you can see the one on the left has the foreground in focus, and the one on the right has a softer foreground. And as we move back through both of these, you will see I was on a tripod. They're moving at the same pace, but you'll see it wasn't far beyond the tip of this, and actually I think it's back here farther, that the water tends to be more in focus on the right. So our foreground focus is now shifted over to the right image instead of the left, and it didn't take it very much depth to do that. But if we walk around the front edge, the foreground, you can see we are sharp on the right, left, and the right is the softer one. As we move across the rock, you can see it's continuing to stay there. The grass on the left is sharper, and as we move back and we get to the end of these dark rocks, you'll see this rock on the right now is sharper than the one on the left. It's not a lot, but it is a little bit. And as we continue to move back through here, you will notice that it is definitely sharper on the right than it is on the left. So our focus tends to shift right here, or which photo is more sharp tends to shift right at this point. So our composite should essentially use only this foreground rock and that plant for the most part on our foreground. So the left image and then the right image should dominate the majority of the background. When we put it together, you'll see it does some funny things, but you can see back here then again the right hand side is in focus, the left hand side is softer. So let's take these into Photoshop and show you how this works in Photoshop. Now to do that, what I would do is have my cursor on one of these 2 images. On the image portion of the frame, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to Edit In, come across, go all the way to the bottom, Open as Layers in Photoshop. And it will take both pictures, put them in one document in Photoshop. So this is what I would do. I've already got it opened for us, so you don't have to wait for it to load over in Photoshop. So we'll move over there and I will show you that one. So this is the picture. You can see both images, one on top of the other. And if we zoom in to our image here, you'll see this is the top one. Let me zoom a little closer so you can see it. This is the top one. If I turn off the top one, now we're seeing the one that's in less focus. You will also notice that there was a bit of movement, not just in the water, but in the rocks. And that's what our first step is, to align that, or actually our second step. Our first step, I believe I'm going to go ahead and name these foreground and background. To me, it's a little helpful. If you have a lot of them, you may not go through and name 40 different pictures. But for me, it's helpful to see the top one and the bottom one. This is the farthest point, this is the closest point, and so on. So this one I'm going to rename by just double tapping on the lettering, the text, and I'm going to type in background, hit enter. I'm going to come over to this one, turn it on, double tap, type foreground, and hit enter. Now, I showed you that they're not both aligned, so we need to align those. So I'm going to select both of them. If you had 2 or 102, we need to get them all highlighted so that we can do an alignment on all of them. So to do that, you're going to make sure the topmost layer is clicked and highlighted. You can see that it is. And then you would scroll to the very bottom of the layers panel. So scroll down till you find your bottom image, and then you would shift click to select them all. In my case, it's only 2, so I could have just done a command click, or control if you're a PC, but we want them all highlighted. I have 2. We're going to go up to edit, come down here, auto align layers. I'm going to click on that. It gives me a panel. I need to decide what projection I want to use. I always use auto. And I would hit OK, and it will start aligning them right here in this particular document. Now, because it takes just a few seconds, I have done this in advance, and so I'm going to flip over to the one that has been aligned. So now if I turn these off and on, you'll see the water moving, but the rocks stay still. So we are in alignment. They are both still selected, so my next move is to go to Edit. I'm going to come back down. There's Auto Align. We're going to go past that and go to Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to select that. And now I want to make sure Stacked Images is the dot that's been clicked on. These 2 are also checked, and I'm going to hit OK. Now normally that's what I would do, and it would take the time to go through, and it will blend the sharpest parts of each image and compose them into one. It takes just a little bit of time, so on the sake of saving time, I've done it in advance. I'm going to click over to the document that has had it done. So when it's finished, this is what it looks like. So I have my original 2 images that I stacked together, that I wanted stacked together. You'll notice now they each have a mask on them, and on that mask, it's black and white areas. So the black part is the area of that particular image that is not as sharp, and so Photoshop doesn't want to show it. So it's showing the areas that are white in the mask. And then when it gets all the pieces figured out for those 2, it actually made a 3rd layer. It merged those 2 together. So let's just turn these off, and I'm even going to turn off this one so you can see kind of what that does. So this is where the mask is black, and so it's making it so that you can't see this part of the background because it was softer than what it found on the other image, on the other layer. And then it said that this is the sharper part of the other one. Now you'll notice that it picks and chooses a few spots within the area that I got a feeling was sharper back there, but it was reading something within that image that said no, the other layer has a sharper bit of this image. So you can see this is what the mask is showing on this one. I can reverse it and show you what this mask looks like. So there's that sharper foreground, and it pulls out a few different things throughout, and all together then we get this merged image. And so at this point we can go ahead and save it back to Lightroom, and then we can bring it back. If you want to keep just a copy of the merged layer without any editing done to it, then you could take it back into Lightroom at this point, or you could continue on and doing whatever edit you wanted to do within Photoshop and then save it back to Lightroom again, or you could do both saves. It will work either way. So let's go back to Lightroom, and this is where I had saved it out. And I have had somebody ask me a question, and we'll go back over to Photoshop and I'll explain that in just a second. But you can see it did a pretty good job. You can look to see while you're still in Photoshop, and I do recommend that you go through here, and because of the way it has all this little bit here, a little bit there, make sure it's really a good job of blending it together, so you can then zoom into this merged copy and really inspect it and make sure it looks good. Make sure there's no alias things going on. Everything looks like a good join. I had somebody say to me in a question when I was teaching this, and ask a question which I thought was a great question, is if you had this and we were looking at this area. Let's go to the background layer instead. I think it's a little easier to see. And say you wanted to go in and say, I don't know why it is doing this to selecting this part out of here to mask away. I want to paint that back in. Why can you not just paint on that mask? Is it possible? So let's zoom in and look what happens. Oh, see if it's very noticeable up here or not. I find that it doesn't work. Now, why it doesn't work, I've yet to come up with an explanation for that. I'm sure there are better Photoshop people that can tell me, but I'm going to grab my brush tool, and this has been painted away, so it's black in this area. So I want to paint with white and paint it back in. So at 100%. And when I paint it back in at 100%, I think it's sharp where it was, but for whatever reason, it does not show up. I mean, it's obviously noticeable. I've painted it back in. It didn't just paint it away and bring it back to full opacity or whatever I want to call it. I have that outline there, and I don't know why. So I can't tell you why. I can tell you it doesn't work. And if somebody has a clue to why, I would be happy to have them let me know so that I would know for future reference. But I can see that exact box where I tried to paint that back in. So it does not work. So what you would have to do is, if you felt that you wanted it from the original document instead of the way it's been merged, is go ahead and merge it, use the merged one, and then bring in another copy. You can't use this one. You'd have to copy another version of this and bring it over and then paint it in place. Realign it, paint it. I'm not sure what the deal is on that, but I did want to say, no, you cannot alter those masks and get it to look perfect. So let's go back over to Lightroom and go back to the grid view. And now let's show you one in Helicon Focus. So I want to take these two images. I will again show them to you side by side so you can see what you're going to be seeing. Is we have some seagulls, and this is obviously out of focus. This is the one that's in focus. And we've got a few seagulls. What I did want to point out is we've got this one moved. This one actually seagull walked. See, he's almost directly above that post there, and you can see he's farther to the left on the second shot. So that's going to play a part in putting an image together. And if you come down, you'll notice the only thing on this right hand side that's in focus is these rocks. This would also be a perfect example for one that will go together quite easily manually without using any special software. You could just do a manual blend on it and it would work great. But in this case, we'll go ahead and show you how it works in Helicon Focus. So when you open it, you'll see that you can either drag and drop your images from your file system, but if you're in Lightroom and you're opening it the way I am going to, I have saved out JPEGs to make it fast. And I'm going to go up here and hit this. It will take me into my file system. I'll find where I've stored my images, which is in here. It's this image and this image. I'm going to hit open, and you can see they're both in really quickly because they were small JPEGs. There are three, these are both in here, so whichever one is highlighted is the one you're seeing on the big screen right now. If I highlight this one, you'll see now this is the one that's sharper, and this has got the softer background, and vice versa. Down here are three different rendering methods. I will say I tend to use method B the most, but there are three, and you should try each one because they probably all have their strong points for different type of pictures, and you may find that one that works better than the other. So we will run through these, and then you can adjust the radius and the smoothing as you see fit, and we would hit render. And as quickly as that with two pictures, it just instantly, oh, my thing crashed. I apologize. Let's see if I can open that back up and get it to work without crashing. And if it crashes again, oops. Okay, so let's load those pictures back in one more time. me hit render. Good, it didn't crash. Okay, so let's, I hit render, and now we have this image. So I'm going to go to full screen so I can get at my zoom tools. I'm going to zoom in so we can see what we got. You know, we are sharp throughout. So this is the one that hasn't been rendered. This is showing the source image on the left, and this is the piece that has been rendered. So this is your final image. And let's look at our birds. This one looks pretty good. We're sharp throughout. The rocks are sharp. But we can see we've got two birds, and that's that one that moved, I told you. So this is what happens on that. This bird moved his head and body a little bit, so we've got a bit of ghosting going on and a bit of ghosting going on here. So this one really isn't working great for us. Let's try method B, and we will hit that render, and let's zoom in again, and we'll see we do have two birds on that one, but not as much as we did on the others, so that's definitely fixable. Okay, and I'm not getting any movement on these birds, so this one did better with our bird movement. But for the sake of trying a third one, let's try it, see if we can get all the birds better. And no, we're still getting two birds here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it. And I think this one might be worse than the other one as far as showing the movement. So method B was certainly our best bet on that one. And so this would be the one I would save out. And I would use, and then I would save it out to the file where it came from. I would then bring it into Photoshop, and I would go ahead and clone that out, and we would have a great image. How you save it is, you can do retouching in here. I've never used it. You can put text on it and rescale it. I've never used it, but I do save from here. So you have different ways you can save it. I'll usually just use the top save button, but you have quite a few different things you can do. And you would hit save. It will put it back in the file where it needs to be. You can then find it, bring it into Photoshop, and continue your edit. So let's come up here, get out of full view, go back to Lightroom, and let's look at the next one we're going to run through Photoshop. So this one has more images, is why I wanted to show you. And so I would click on the first one and then shift click on the last one, and again I could right click on any one of these images, go to edit in, and then open in Photoshop. But I'm going to go to it up here so you can see it. We'll go to photo, it's the same thing, edit in, excuse me, edit in, move to the side, open as layers in Photoshop. Oops, I meant to stop that before I did it. So I am opening them. It brought me over to Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. It would start loading them all in, but I've already done that for us. So this is what they look like when they're all loaded in. So now I want to go through and show you what has happened. Watch the movement here, oops, from each one of these as I click them off and on. And I do this to make sure I know if they are in alignment or not, and this one is not. So my next step on this will be to highlight the top image, scroll to the last image, shift click. They're all highlighted at this point. I'm going to go up to edit again, just like we did when we only had two. Auto align layers. It gives you some options. I've always used auto, and then I would click OK. So I'm going to cancel out of that because I have this preloaded. And now they're all aligned. So I would have waited a couple minutes. It all depends on how many images and how big those files are to how long it will take them to load in and align. Each one of the steps, it takes, you know, the more pictures, the bigger the files, so on, the longer it takes to do it. And you'll notice that right now with these 10 images aligned the way they are, it's 2.5 gig. So it's a lot of information. And so I will now go through and check to see if my images have lined up. And I do this really to make sure that nothing has failed to line up, because occasionally they do. Occasionally auto align doesn't work as well as I wish it did. But this one worked great, and you can see that it is aligned and changed some things because we see a few little white bits around the outside edge. And so at this point, with all of these still highlighted, I would go up to edit, and come past Auto Align and hit Auto Blend Layers. Again, just like before, I would make sure this stacked images is the one we want checked, and these are checked, and I will hit OK, and it will start chugging through the process of finding the sharp on each layer and masking away the stuff that's soft. And because that actually takes several minutes, I've done it in advance, and you can see that it has attached a mask to each layer, each picture layer, and it has composited all these that have been masked together into one merged file so that we can see it. And again, if I click these off, you can see what has been taken from each image, which I think is kind of neat to look at, but I don't necessarily save them. So I have my merged image and I have all the portions of the images below, and you can see now my size of my file is 3.03 gig. It's big. So I don't necessarily want to keep all those because I haven't even started to edit this, and if I do some editing, it's going to just keep getting larger and larger. I have all of these images back in Lightroom in my file system. I can bring it in and remerge them all if I need to, and it was fairly fast, so I can reproduce this if I wanted to. So for me, I will delete all those layers except for the merged layer. I have had the question asked, could I not just flatten it? Yes, you can just flatten it too, but it's faster to delete than it is to flatten, and it essentially gets you to the same point, so I just delete. So I will come over to this image, click on the top one, go to the bottom, shift click, making sure my merged image isn't included in the highlighted area, and I will simply just click and drag that into the trash can, and boom, they're gone, and I'm left with just my one merged layer, which now is only 211 meg. So at this point, I could continue editing right within this document. I can save it back to Lightroom at this point and come back and edit it some other time, or I can continue to edit it right now and then save it into Lightroom after the editing process. And you can see this picture needs to have some healing brush taken to it to get rid of the lint that happened to be on the table. So you can go in and clean it up, and you can do other things. And I went ahead then and saved it back before I did the editing. We'll go back to Lightroom. You can see the finished product here. And so I need to go back in and clean it up in Photoshop. But what I did do is some work on the color while I was back in Lightroom. So you can see this is with color, or some color adjustments. So here's what it looked like straight out of Photoshop after the merge, and then I came back into Lightroom and did the color work to kind of make this, warm this area up, because it was a little bit blue, cyan blue, something in there. So anyway, this is that image. So one more image to show you, and it's a lot of ferns, and this was all one shoot, so there's like 41 images in here. What I wanted to note is, as you're taking these images, stacked images, the best practice to do is to get in the habit of, before you take your first image on that stack, take a picture of your hand, then take your stacked images, and then you will take another picture of your hand. Because your next set of images may be very similar, and at a glance it may be very hard to tell where one started and one ended. Do I have two sets in here? Do I have three sets in here? Is it just one set? There's a lot of pictures. Or why do I have two pictures that look alike? Are they alike? Oh no, when I have to zoom in to figure out what the deal is on these. So it's nice to have them marked by doing a photo of your hand before and after. So when you import them, you know exactly where they land. So you know exactly, between these two handprints, you have something going on. Between the next two set of hands, you have another something going on. Whether it's a pano, that's how I mark my panos too, or whether it's a set of stacks. So this is how I did this. Now, I'm going to tell you we're going to do this one in Helicon Remote, in Helicon Focus. But what I wanted to make note is, I did run this through Photoshop in practice of getting ready for this show, and it did not handle this very well at all. So I went and put it through Helicon Focus, and it did a much better job. However, the first time I did discover that it didn't do great either. And so what I discovered is some of the images were just too much. So I had loaded them all in, and we'll go ahead and load the entire set in. And it came in very quickly because they were small JPEGs. And you can go through and see what each one looks like as we went through. But what I found is that if I used 104 to 111 in the process, it gave me very poor results. So I discovered, I came in and I know that I need to uncheck these. So the ones you uncheck will not be included in the render. It will only render the ones that have a check mark. So I've got the ones checked that I want to use, and for the sake of time I know that B is my best option, and I'm going to render it through there, and you can watch it build. And I think that's kind of fun to see how it's adding and what it's adding as it goes through until it's complete. Now I'm going to zoom in, so to do that I need to go full screen, and I'm going to start zooming in, and you can see it did a very nice job on this foliage. It did miss right through here a little bit, so that may need a little attention. Down through here it did a pretty good job too, but what it didn't do a good job on was this area. And honestly, I prefer the soft background behind there anyway, instead of getting a little bit more focus going on it. And it left this line, so this is not good. But I think for me, the way I work is I would go ahead and save this out, bring it into Photoshop, then select one of these pictures that I took that had a really nice soft background, and then I would do a manual blend of this focus stack to paint away this stuff that I don't care for in this area. And it's kind of nice because it's kind of, I don't have to go in between all these little bitty pieces, so I'm going to be able to do it fairly easily. And so I would paint in a nice soft blurry background in there instead of one that has a lot more detail in it. So that would be how I would handle it. And so at this point I've gone through and I've shown you a good array of some processes, some things that you will encounter that maybe don't work the way you wish they had, and I think it will give you a starting point for getting started in doing photo stacking. I hope you have fun doing it. You go out and you practice, even if they're not keepers. You go ahead and do some things on your kitchen counter, give it a try, get some experience, and then try to do a lot more photo stacking if you like this technique. It's not hard, it just takes a little bit of experimentation and you'll be good to go. So until next time, see you later. Bye now.